Thanks. Welcome back to Senate Education. We have with us now Or Yang, and Or's going to just tell us a little bit about why, again, this language is important. You've been sitting here listening to our testimony. Anything you can help us with would be great. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah, thank you. For the record, Or Yang, Executive Director of the Vermont Human Rights Commission. And I just want to address a couple of the things that have come up during the walkthrough with Damian Leonard, your legislative counsel on this bill. The first part of it is a question that was brought up about, are we creating a standard here that that is really about, that is hypersensitivity? Right, and I just want to first point you out to the language around petty slights and trivial inconveniences. That language was added so that we didn't do that, so that we didn't have hypersensitivity around harassment. And so, you know, it's possible that you might have a student being called the N-word in 2023. And a court might say, that word is so offensive, so outdated, that any person would find that beyond trivial inconvenience and a petty slight. But you might have a student with a disability who's called dumb once, and a court would say, that's probably trivial inconvenience and petty slight, right? So this language is here so that a court had the ability to say that we're changing the bar, we're correcting a bar, we're strengthening our anti-discrimination laws, but it's not no bar. We're still having a bar here that people still enjoy freedom of speech, people can make mistakes, and people can, kids can occasionally engage in bad behavior, but it's not going to hold a school responsible. This is a bill that changes how schools look at harassment and when schools will be held responsible. This is not a bill that addresses how kids are held responsible. It is the disciplinary rules that are in place at each school district that addresses whether kids are suspended or expelled or corrected, or whether a school puts trainings into place or safety plans into place for how to address it. Not this. And this law, changing this law, does not change those rules around discipline. And I want to, because I'm really sensitive to the school to prison pipeline as well. And we want to be very thoughtful about how schools approach kids who make mistakes or who are also learning. But this bill does not change how a school addresses things. And remember, how a school approaches things is going to be different from age groups, So for example, if you have a kindergartner who heard the N-word and says it, how a school addresses that is entirely different from your senior in high school that uses the N-word knowingly against another student and repeats that. And also how we address it for the first time in a school versus hearing the N-word repeatedly by a student over and over again, or the F word for LGBTQ kids, or other like derogatory language that are used against girls in schools as well. And so, and I want to talk about this idea of punishment, right? We do generally have a false belief in our society that to correct harassment, we have to take a punitive stance. We have to punish kids. And the reason why we believe that is because we think that there are bad actors. We think there are bad people, and we are reluctant to. This happens in the employment arena. If someone engages in bad behavior, sexual harassment, we fire them or we demote them, and we say, that's a bad actor. It had nothing to do with us. Right? But we're reluctant to do the same thing with kids because we're going, they're learning and so forth. The reality is that we're all responsible for the cure. We're all responsible for training. We're all responsible for creating a culture and a climate that is inclusive and welcoming. And that's why punishment doesn't make sense or expulsions or suspensions do not make sense across the board. And this doesn't necessarily do anything with regards to that. What we need is effective trainings for schools
Right.
to understand how to address when kids misbehave and kids use derogatory language or harmful language. We need to find training for teachers to validate the kid that has been harmed by that language and that behavior. And we need to find tools for teachers and social workers and principals to address the student that is in need of learning when they use that language too. Now that's about training. That is about how do we effectively train administrators and principals and social workers and guidance counselors and teachers on how to address kids in the appropriate age range. And that training is going to be different. That training is different from K through 6. That training is different from middle school where these things happen a lot. And that training is absolutely different in high school.
Or does it happen now, the training?
To some extent,
But it's more of a,
it's compliance. Right now, the training is oftentimes about compliance. It is complying with the law. The training says harassment is severe or pervasive. That's when you need to take action. And it's not good training. It's not great training. It happens, and in some districts it's happening more than other districts, but it's not preventative training. It's not necessarily best practices training, and it's certainly not a training on how to, it's not a training that is specific to necessarily different age groups, but that can happen. That's very possible that can happen. And something that was brought up around like restorative justice and restorative process, that's also not a perfect process to address harassment in schools. There are probably many paths on how to address it. And I mentioned some of those last time, is a safety plan, right? Like we know that oftentimes kids harm and hurt each other verbally when there's no adults around. A safety plan is putting extra adults around, right? Rather than suspension or expulsions. A safety plan might be changing kids' bus stops or changing buses for kids, asking a bus driver to actually go a different route to pick up a kid so that the same kids are not on the same bus all the time. So that doesn't mean suspension or expulsion. That's about being creative about how we do that. That is all part of the training, not anything that has to do with this bill. But this bill, well, what this bill will do is it's going to capture those cases, not the hypersensitivity kids, but it's going to capture the cases that existing law has said, no go. It's going to capture the kid that is in those multiple protected classes and has had to separately prove that she was subjected to discrimination in each of those instances. While Damien mentioned that there was some case law that would find that one instance of groping would be sufficiently severe under existing law, there are case law that says one instance of groping is not severe. And this law, this is saying one instance might get in the door. And that's what this is about. And the last thing I want to say is that this is a bill about holding a school responsible, but it isn't going to automatically hold them responsible because we're changing the standard. Remember that in order for a student to sue under even this law as it's changed, they still have to prove that the behavior is because of their membership in a protected class. That's really hard. That's really hard to prove. If you have a kid with a disability who's getting beaten up on the playground, and you happen to see that this kid is being picked on a lot, that's not enough to get in the door. We might, as adults, view that and go, why is this kid being picked on? And we might assume that it's because this kid has a disability, but that's not enough under the legal standard. That kid still has to prove under existing law and this new change that it is because of the membership in protected class. So we're still looking for slurs, derogatory statements. We're still looking for things that kids are doing to this particular student that shows the reason you're getting picked on is because you're a student with a disability, you're a person with a disability. The other prong of a case is that you have to prove the school knew about it. You still have to show the school knew and the school failed to do nothing. Now, I will say our schools are like, they try to be on top of things. They are trying to address these things. And so it's hard to hold a school responsible if they can demonstrate that they actually tried hard, right? And so,
I just asked what
Yeah.
Senator Williams jumped in, please.
You know, it was a while ago since I was in school, but when,
me too.
when I went home, if I had been in trouble, I feared going home more than being dealt with at school.
Yeah.
So at what point is the policy gonna be to bring parents in?
Yeah.
I mean, because there's a possibility, maybe the kids are from parent.
Yeah.
And that it, you know, silences concurrence and maybe they're condoning it.
Mhm.
It's not the kid's fault necessarily.
Right, and again, oftentimes it's not the fault of the, this is where I want to go back to. It's oftentimes all of our faults that harassment occurs. So it's not, and it could be the parents, it could be the classroom, it could be other students that they're learning from. And so I want to get away from fault and kind of address that we can still address the behavior and not fault necessarily that student. Because we can go, wow, we need to do more training, or we need to do some learning in this classroom around this particular issue. Or, you know, this is an opportunity to do more inclusive book reading, looking for books on how to address this in first grade or second grade around diversity and equity issues. But most HHB policies, hazing, harassment, bullying policies, require notice to parents. And so they will be on notice. And so parents have really an intimate involvement in the whole process. This bill does nothing to address that. Again, that comes back to what are the policies that are in place.
Senator Williams.
Yeah, if I could, just to kind of piggyback on Senator Williams' question, but you did use the words holding the school responsible.
Mhm.
And I concur that it's a much bigger problem than with any school environment. It's community norms, it's parents directly. I just sense that we're putting more, I understand the intent of the bill, okay, I really do, but we're putting more onus on the conduct of the school, not the conduct of the parent or the society, the community. I fear that, you know, we're kind of misaligning responsibility. That's my comment.
I really appreciate that comment, and I would say that the onus is on each of us if we have power or authority over that climate. The reason why the onus is on schools is because it's in the educational system. The onus is on employers in the workplace. The onus is on a business owner when it's happening in their restaurant and it's happening in their business. And the onus is on me at the Human Rights Commission to address harassment with the 6 people that work there, right? So like we have, the onus is always on us when we have authority or power over the environment. And the reason why the onus is on the schools under Title 16 is because the schools have power over that school environment. Now, remember that.
So Senator Williams, or Senator Weeks, are you proposing that, floating the idea that really the buck should stop with the parents and maybe it's handled like truancy? In other words, if your kids aren't going to school, we're going to follow up with you. You could be fined, whatever. Your kid is harassing someone. Okay, we're going to, it's more on the parents than on the school in terms of
I'm not sure of the solutions.
Yeah.
I just fear that, you know, knowing a lot of educators, and being married to an educator, that we may be misassigning responsibility.
Right. No, I'm just asking what you're kind of thinking.
I'm not sure what I'm thinking that. I just know that I'm a little bit of shock because I'm not sure this, I understand what the problem is, but I don't really believe this is a fully vetted solution. I'm just not sure it's got the right, it creates the right environment at the right time.
Remember,
Please, no, go ahead, Board, and then we'll go to.
remember that existing law already puts the onus on schools. So you're not changing that perspective. The onus is already on schools to address it.
It's not working.
And
It's beyond this.
but that's okay. So I want to talk about cause and I want to talk about response. The onus is on schools to respond to harassment when they see it, even if they didn't cause the harassment to occur in the first place. Just like an employer, a supervisor, or manager has a duty to address harassment, even if they're not the ones creating the harassment, right? So, and by the way, there are many instances in which kids engage in harassing behavior, but their parents don't. Because of social media, I think that was brought up, because of other kids, because that is information that is readily available to everybody all the time. So you might have a kid whose home is like, and this is true of all of us, by the way. I'm the HRC executive director. My kids could potentially be engaged in harassment because of things that they see on social media. So there's it's not necessarily like even a parenting issue. And so I don't even want to put like discrimination and harassment on parents. It's a societal issue. But the onus is on each of us in our respective workplace to address it, right? Even if we're not the cause of it.
So that goes back to, each school may have the discretion to deal with it in a different way. A teacher may see it
Right.
and just brush it under the rug or to try and take immediate action to deal with it on the spot. But this may have already been the 5th or 6th time that this individual student's experienced it. At some point, you have to establish what's discretionary and
Yeah.
acceptable, and what isn't.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, that my original point about the training, that every school should be on the same sheet.
I agree, 100%. And that's the guidance that should come from the ALB, the Agency of Education, creating a model HHB policy so that all schools have a model to look to. And they do have a responsibility to do that under Title 17. And schools, of course, don't have to necessarily adopt that, but they do often use that as the model. And you're right, we should be creating a situation where we have clear training. That training should be specific to different age groups. That training should be specific to teachers and social workers and principals, because you have people who are responsible for investigations, and then you have teachers who are in the classroom who are responsible for reporting, right? So the training for how to report and what to report is different from the training for how to investigate and effectively investigate and give notice.
Senator Hershey.
I just wanted to get back to the conversation point about legislating what we can legislate. We can make rules that involve schools. We can't make rules that determine how a parent raises their kid. Let's say we hypothetically made a bill that says, all right, it's now illegal to be racist in general. That's not going to work. But there are different steps that you can take when it comes to employment law, education law, and in our courtrooms, and bias training and that sort of thing as a response to what is an unfortunate cultural undercurrent that does require us to try to make some changes. But that's something that society has to evolve out of over time. We don't have a magic wand to just make it all go away, unfortunately. But yeah, so just my random train of thought on this.
So what are you thinking about the bill?
I think it's fine.
We talked a little bit about unintended consequences in this. Can you think of any? Well, we talked about New Americans,
Right.
Specifically unintended consequences.
Yeah.
I mean, we've already shared a bunch of unintended consequences that we're
Right.
concerned about, but can you think about?
I don't see this bill as harming New Americans. Because I don't see this bill as, because I don't necessarily think that New Americans are particularly vulnerable to engaging in harassment behavior more than any other individual. And so, yes, are they learning
Even as
about
a
what's
new
Yeah.
culture,
Yeah.
completely different culture, I just
But
worry.
but what you're learning is not what, the suggestion, I think, that a New American is learning about appropriate behavior and needing to learn appropriate behavior, is different from, do they just need to learn about customs and culture and so forth, is different. And we don't have any evidence or data to suggest that new Americans are the ones who are subjected to perpetrating harassment more than any other person. In fact, that's probably the opposite. That's probably not true. New Americans are often subjected to harassment as the target, not the perpetrator of harassment. So
I just want to go to Senator Sheen.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a point to that.
Yeah.
You know, when I think of that situation, I go back to page 2 when I look at, you know, starting at line 1 to line 3, the totality of the circumstances. And you have a new American and there's a group of kids who think it's funny to teach him a swear word that's
Right.
very bad, and he goes around saying it. I would trust that the teachers would pick up on that and realize, all right, if this group of kids told the new American to say this word, obviously it doesn't rise to the level of harassment. It's just kids doing stupid stuff. So that's where I go to when I think of that.
So somewhat along those lines, what Senator Williams has been talking about, should anything, if we were to move this, accompany this bill around mandating training, anything updated? You know, we do have a hazing, harassing, bullying
Mhm.
statute on the books.
Mhm.
Basically, you may recall, a few years ago, the agency said everybody has to adopt their own. You don't adopt your own, you have to adopt the agency's. So that's out there, but anything in terms of education, training that should accompany this, or even as I think Senator Williams said, time, giving, you know, maybe it gets implemented in a year.
Mhm.
Just a few ideas.
I don't have a strong opinion on the time. I think that anytime we're changing the laws, the people that have to comply with them are going to put out new trainings. Just like you change sexual harassment laws in the workplace, employers are out there changing the policies and doing trainings immediately. The HHB policy as it exists already requires that schools undergo trainings and have training programs in place. And I do know that while some districts are far better at trainings than others, is that if you change this law, there will be new training. And in fact, that's what we want. We actually want to encourage that. And so this law being passed would actually encourage more training around what that means, right?
Yeah.
So for you, does that mean we need to appropriate money for that training? Because if we don't, it'll just be taken away from the classroom.
Right now, they're already doing the training. So all you're really doing is you're not saying more trainings. You're just saying the training that you're doing right now, adjust it,
Okay.
correct it to existing law. Instead of teaching severe and pervasive, you're saying, let's pay attention to totality of the circumstance. Let's pay attention to single incidents. Let's teach our teachers to report even single incidents, whether or not they know it's harassment. And let's teach our investigators in the schools to investigate whether or not it immediately appears that way. And then let's teach our principals and our vice principals, our assistant principals to learn the disciplinary rules and how to address that in the context of the HHB policy. And so the training already is in place and the money is in place. I don't think this bill requires any money attached to it.
Ms. Garces, do you want to say something? Are you trying to?
I do, and I want to tell you that you have to go testify at 3.
In 5 minutes,
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
yes.
But I do want to say, and
And I don't want you to rush. We can always have
Okay.
it back before, but
I would love to be back because I am part of the Bullying Harassment Council.
yes.
As part of that work, we have been like talking and talking. There have been a lot of back and forth. Do we need to exist? Do we not? There have been a lot. There's a lot of families who would want to testify around this. A lot of students who are going through this. And specifically when we're thinking about the training and what schools are doing and what are not doing, and like what all the challenges that they have, not as again like the challenges around training and who gets the training. That in addition you put the turnover of teachers and administrators that are taking the training then moving to another school and what that process looks like. The Agency of Education has been working on amending the policy and procedure right now. But now that we have this shift, we have a meeting coming up as a council, and we'll be talking about the things and the role of the council and how we're pushing that forward. So I would love to come back perhaps bring the chair of the HHP Council to share about the work that we've been doing, and also bring some families to share in about their process in this conversation.
Yeah, we have, we're gonna adjourn in a month.
Yeah.
Exactly. We can meet for another, I'd say, 3.5 weeks, this committee, but we need to move this, we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So what we can do is Friday, we're gonna hear from the superintendents and principals and all those folks. We can hear from Ms. Garces on Friday also. And then we could also hear from the AOE on Friday, and then I think we should just make a decision at that point as to whether or not we want to include this in the miscellaneous ed bill.
Thank you.
if I could just close with one
Yeah.
last comment.
Please.
If you don't move this bill and S-103 passes,
Yeah,
you're saying that teachers who are harassed in the workplace is now subjected to a different standard, but kids
right.
have a
Because-
harsher standard to meet. And that seems fundamentally
That's a good point.
unfair and
Very good point.
inconsistent.
Yeah. And I just want to remind everyone, one of the reasons, so S-103, which came out of our Economic Development Committee, this was sort of missed at one point, this part, so, that's one of the reasons it's before us now. And that's a great reminder. And we'll hear from the NEA and others on Friday.
That's great questions, and I hope I've answered them, and I thank you so much for your time
Thank you.
and your continued commitment to doing this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, as soon as Ms. St. James arrives, we'll get started on work.